Hello everyone, here is Afra Siab. Today we are going to solve Cambridge IGCSE Physics Paper 4 Theory Extended, held on May-June 2017, and paper code is 0625 with variant 43. So let's start from question number 1. Question number 1, Part A, acceleration is a vector quantity. Underline the two vector quantities in the list below. So acceleration is a vector quantity and we have to underline the two quantities that are vector. So first of all we have to know about that what is vector. Basically vector is a quantity that has magnitude and direction. So I write here vectors has magnitude and direction. Here first of all is energy. Energy is a scalar quantity because it has only magnitude, it does not have any direction. Next one is force. Force is a vector quantity because it has magnitude as well as direction. So I underline first of all force. Next is frequency. Frequency is the total number of vibration in 1 second. It has only magnitude. It does not have any specific direction. So frequency is also a scalar quantity. It does not a vector quantity. Next is impulse. Impulse is the product of force and time. That is F cross T. As here force is a vector quantity. So impulse is also a vector quantity because impulse has magnitude as well as direction. So I underline impulse. Next one is mass. Mass has only magnitude, so it's a scalar quantity, and refractive index. It is also a scalar quantity because it has only magnitude. It does not have any direction. Next part B. A car accelerates uniformly from rest at 2.2 meter per second square for 3.0 seconds. Part first. Calculate the speed of the car at time t is equal to 3.0 seconds. So here we are given that car starts from rest. It means that its initial velocity is equal to 0 at the acceleration 2.2 meter per second square and time t is equal to 3.0 seconds. We have to find out the final speed. So we already know that acceleration is the change in speed over change in time. I write here acceleration is equal to delta v over t, where delta v is v minus u over t. Here v is the final speed and u is the initial speed. As the car is at rest, so the initial speed is equal to 0. So it will be v minus 0 over t, which is v over t. Next we have to find out the value of speed. So v will be equal to acceleration multiplied by time. Here acceleration is given 2.2 meter per second square and time is 3.0. So that the value of speed comes to be 6.6 meter per second. So final speed will be 6.6 meter per second. Part 2. At time t is equal to 3.0 second, it has travelled a distance of 9.9 meters. Calculate the average speed of the car during the first 3.0 second of the journey. Here we have to find out the average speed where distance and time is given. So first of all, speed is distance over time and the average speed is total distance covered by the car over total time. I write here average speed is equal to total distance divided by total time. Here we have to find out the value of average speed. It will be equal to total distance is 9.9 meter and time is 3.0. So the value of average speed comes to be 3.3 meter per second. I write here speed is equal to 3.3 meter per second. Next part 3. On figure 1.1, sketch a distance time graph for the first 3.0 second of the journey. So here we have to draw the distance time graph for the car in the first 3.0 second. First of all, car is at rest. It means that at the start it does not cover any distance. So its initial distance is equal to 0 and it starts from this point. It means that the car starts from the origin. Next we see that the speed increases and it becomes 6.6 meter per second. Also the average speed of the car is 3.3 meter per second and at the time at 3.0 second car covers a distance of 9.9 meter. So here we can simply say that the speed of the car increases and the slope of distance time graph is actually equal to speed. I write here speed is equal to slope of distance time graph. So the slope of distance time graph is actually speed. Speed is increasing. It means that the slope of the curve also increases. So when I have to draw the motion of the car in the first 3.0 second, it starts from the origin. I take a point here and it covers a distance of 9.9. It means that the maximum distance here it is 10. So I have to draw a line and take 9.9 meter. So it will be at this line. Next we study the motion in 3.0 seconds. So we also have take this point. Next I draw a curve that shows that the slope of the So the curve will be like this. This shows that the speed of the car increases. Question number 2, part A. State the word equation that defines momentum. Here we have to write the equation that describes the momentum. Momentum is the product of mass and velocity. I write here P is equal to mv, but we have to write it in words. So I write here momentum is equal to mass multiplied by velocity. Part B. A metal block A traveling in a straight line at 4.0 meter per second on a smooth surface collide with a second metal block B which is at rest. Figure 2.1 shows the two metal blocks A and B before and after the collision. So here is the figure 2.1. We can see that before the collision there are two blocks A and B. The mass of the block A is 3.2 kilogram and its velocity is 4.0 meter per second. While the block B has mass 1.6 kilogram and it is at rest. It means that its initial velocity is equal to 0. Now after collision, both of the blocks are shown. Block A is moving with the velocity of 1.5 meter per second while the second is moving with velocity v. The mass of A is 3.2 kilogram. The mass of B is 1.6 kilogram. After the collision, the velocity of A is 1.5 meter per second. Calculate. Part first, the momentum of A before the collision. So we have to find out the momentum of the block A before collision. So I write the formula that momentum is equal to mass and velocity. So we have to find out the momentum of block A. I represent P of A is equal to MAUA, where the mass of block A is 3.2 kilogram and it is moving with the velocity 4.0 meter per second. So the momentum of the block A comes to be 12.8 Newton second. I write here momentum is equal to 12.8 Newton second. Part 2. The velocity v of the P after the collision. Here we have to find out the velocity of ball B after collision. So going back to figure, we can see from here that in order to calculate the velocity of the block B after the collision, we have to use the law of conservation of momentum, that the total momentum before collision is equal to the total momentum after collision, or we can simply say that the total momentum of the system remain conserved. So I write here total momentum before collision is equal to total momentum after collision. In this system we have two masses A and B. So I write here before collision, the total momentum is the sum of momentum of block A and B. It will be M1 U1. This is for first block, and M2 U2, which is for second block. And after the collision, the momentum will be M1 V1 plus M2 V2. So here basically we have to find out the velocity of the block B after collision. It means that we have to find out the value of V2. So putting values here, the momentum of the block A before collision we already calculate in part 1, it is 12.8. I write here 12.8 plus the mass of second block is 1.6 kilogram. Multiply by 0 because the second block initially at rest. So it will be equal to M1, the mass of first block 3.2 kg, multiply by the velocity after collision. So here we can see that the block A is moving with 1.5 meter per second. I write here 1.5 plus second block has mass 1.6 multiplied by V. So I let that V2 is equal to V. So it becomes 12.8 is equal to plus 0. It will be equal to 4.8 plus 1.6 V. And then it becomes 1.6 V is equal to 8.0 and V is equal to 8.0 divided by 1.6. The value of V comes to be 5.0 meter per second. It means that the velocity of the block V after collision is 5 meter per second. So I write here V is equal to 5 meter per second. Next part, C. In the collision that occurred in part B, the block A and block B are in contact for 0.050 seconds. Calculate the average force that is exerted on B during the collision. Here we have to find out the average force on the block B. So first of all, we know that impulse, it is the product of force and time, and impulse is also equal to change in momentum, that is mv minus mu. Here we have to find out the force exerted on block B. So I write here it for block B. So I can simply write this equation as I is equal to delta P, which is also equal to mv minus mu, and it is equal to F cross T. So it gives us that F cross T is equal to mv minus mu. So first of all, I have to find out the change in momentum, that is delta P, and it is equal to final momentum, that is after collision, minus initial momentum, that is before collision. So first of all, I write momentum before collision, it will be equal to m and u, that we already calculate its value. It is equal to this 12.8. I write here 12.8, and momentum after collision, it will be equal to m and v, and its value is 4.8 Newton second, that we calculate here this value. So we have write both of the momentums, initial and final. Next we have to find out the change in momentum, that is delta P, by subtracting both of these momentum. So that delta P comes to be 12.8 minus 4.8, it is equal to 8.0 Newton second. Now I use this formula, F is equal to delta P over T. Delta P is 8.0 divided by time is given here 0.00, sorry 0.50. So the value of force comes to be 160 Newton. I write here average force is equal to 160 Newton. Next part D. After the collision in part B, the total kinetic energy of the two blocks is less than the kinetic energy of the block A before the collision. Suggest one reason for this. So the total kinetic energy after the collision is less than before the collision. It is because of the reason that some amount of energy is lost as a sound and heat energy during the collision. So I write here some energy is lost as heat and sound energy during collision. Question number 3. A block of wood has a volume of 210 cubic centimeter and a mass of 180 gram. Part A. Calculate the density of the block of wood. So here we have a block that is made up of wood. Its volume is 210 cubic centimeter and mass is 180 gram, and we have to find out the value of density. So we know that density is mass per unit volume, or we can simply say that density is the ratio of the mass and volume. So I write here density is equal to mass over volume. So here we have to find out the density. It will be equal to mass is given 180 gram divided by volume is 210 cubic centimeter, so that the value of density comes to be 0.86 gram per cubic centimeter. We have to be careful about the units because mass is measured here in gram and volume in cubic centimeter. So we use the same unit, gram per cubic centimeter, for the density. So I write here density is equal to 0.86 gram per cubic centimeter. Part B. The block is held just above the surface of a liquid of density 0.88 gram per cubic centimeter. Predict and explain what happens when the block is released. So first of all, we have to place the block at the surface of liquid. If I consider that there is a liquid and block is placed here, and the density of this liquid is 0.88 gram per cubic centimeter. So what happens to the block when we release it? So when we release the block, then it will move so that the density of this block that is made up of wood is smaller as compared to the density of liquid. We can also see from here that we calculate the density of the block of wood, which comes to be 0.86 gram per cubic centimeter, and the density of liquid is given, that is 0.88. It means that 0.86 is smaller as compared to 0.88. So when we release the block, then its density is smaller as compared to the density of liquid, so it will float. I write here the block will float because its density is less than the density of liquid. So that's why the block will float. Question number 4. In the braking system of a car, the brake pedal rotates about a pivot when the pedal is pressed. Figure 4.1 shows part of the braking system. The driver exerts a force of 200 Newton on the pedal at a distance of 22 cm from the pivot. So in figure 4.1 we can see that there is a pivot point that is shown here, and the driver exerts a force of 200 Newton on the pedal here, due to which this force is acted on this piston and the piston moves, due to which the pressure of the oil increases, and the distance of this pedal from the pivot point is 22 cm. This is also be called the perpendicular distance of the pedal from the pivot point. As the pedal rotates about the pivot, so this pedal rotates about the pivot point, a force is exerted on the piston and the pressure of the oil increases. The area of the piston in the cylinder is 5.0 into 10 to the power minus 4 meter square, or it is 0.00050 meter square. Calculate the increase in pressure of the oil. So here we have to find out the increase in pressure. So going back here, we can see that the force on paddle is exerted in this direction. So what will happen? This paddle causes the clockwise movement. Due to this force, the piston moves and the pressure of the oil increases. It means that it causes the anti-clockwise movement. So the anti-clockwise movement will be like this. Both of these movements are equal according to the principle of the moment. So I write here clockwise movement will be equal to anti-clockwise movement. For that, first of all, we have to know about that what is moment. So moment is basically the product of force and the perpendicular distance from the pivot point. Going back here, we can see that here force acting on the paddle and the distance from here to the pivot point. This distance is basically the R. So the product of force and the perpendicular distance from the pivot point is basically known as moment. So first of all, we have to calculate the clockwise moment that is caused by the distance from the pivot point is 22 centimeter. So I write here 200 multiplied by 22 centimeter. The anti-clockwise moment will be. So first of all, here perpendicular distance is given, that is 8.0 centimeter, but force is not given. So first of all, we have to find out force from here. I write it as F2 multiplied by R2, where R2 is 8.0 centimeter. So from here force will be 200 multiplied by 22 over 8.0. It will be equal to 550 Newton. So this is the force that is exerted on the piston here. But we have to find out the increase in pressure of the oil. It means that we have to find out pressure, and pressure we already know that it is equal to force over area. Force that we calculate here 550 Newton divided by area is given 5.0 into 10 to the power minus 4. So the value of pressure comes to be 1.1 into 10 to the power 6 Pascal. The unit of pressure is Pascal. I write here 1.1 into 10 to the power 6 Pascal. So this is the increase in pressure of the oil. Question number 5. A footballer and a referee are discussing a puddle of water that has formed on the pitch. The footballer wears a white shirt, whilst the referee wears a black shirt, which apart from its color is identical. Figure 5.1 shows the two men looking at the puddle. Here is figure 5.1 and there are two men. One is wearing white shirt while the other is wearing black shirt. The weather is bright and sunny. Part A. State and explain how the temperature of the white shirt differs from the temperature of the black shirt. So first of all, there are two men. One is wearing white shirt and other is wearing black shirt. We know that black is a good absorber, while white color is bad absorber. So the man that wearing black shirt will absorb more radiation because the black color is a good absorber. So the temperature of the man that wearing black shirt will be higher as compared to temperature of the man that wearing white shirt. So I write here temperature of the black shirt will be higher than white shirt. Because black color is good absorber and white color is poor absorber. Part B. The volume of the water in the puddle is slowly decreasing. Part 1. Describe how two changes in the weather condition could affect the rate at which the puddle dries. So first change is that when there is a wind blowing, and we can simply say that there is a sunny day, then it dries very quickly. I write here, if wind is blowing, then effect is that it dries quickly. Second is that if there is less humidity. So as the humidity decreases, it dries very quickly. Effect is same as humidity decreases, it dries quickly. Going towards the next part. 2. Explain in terms of the water molecules what happen as the puddle dries. So first of all, the most energetic molecules escape from the liquid and enters into the air, due to which the rest of the water in the puddle cools down. So I write here, most energetic molecules escape from the liquid and enter into air. The rest of water in puddle cools down. Because when most energetic molecules escape, there will be the molecules that has low energy. As a result, the water cools down. Question number 6. Figure 6.1 shows a child releasing a balloon filled with helium. The pressure of the helium in the balloon keeps the balloon inflated. Part A. Explain how the particles of helium produce this pressure. So first of all, if we consider that there is a balloon, and inside this balloon there are helium molecules. These gas molecules collide with each other and with the walls of this balloon because these are moving randomly. So when they collide with each other and also with the walls of balloon, they exert a force on the walls of balloon. And then they change their direction and bounce back. So there will be the change in momentum. So I write here, change in momentum produced because these gas molecules collide with the walls of balloon and bounce back. So there will be the change in momentum. Also these molecules collide with the wall and exert a force here. So as a result there will be the force, or we can simply say that the change in momentum is equal to force multiplied by time, that is impulse. So this causes a force. And we know that pressure is equal to force over area. When there is a force that is produced by the molecules, so these molecules also exert the pressure. So there will be the pressure. So I write here, the molecules of gas collide with each other and also with the walls of balloon. As a result, they change direction. So there will be the change in momentum. This causes a force on surface of wall and produce pressure. According to pressure is equal to force over area. Part B. As the balloon travels upward through the atmosphere, the volume of the helium increases. So here the volume increase, the temperature of the helium remains constant. Part 1. State an equation that relates the volume of the helium to its pressure. So here we have to write the equation that relates the volume with the pressure. So first of all, here temperature is constant and we have to relate the volume and pressure. So we used Boyle's law. According to this law, pressure is inversely proportional to volume and here temperature is constant. So when I arrange this equation, it will be P is proportional to K over V. Sorry, P is equal to K over V. So K is equal to PV. If I consider that the initial volume and pressure is P1, V1, so P1 and V1, and the final volume and pressure is P2, V2. So by comparing both of these equations, I write P1, V1 is equal to P2, V2. So this is the equation that is used to relate the volume with the pressure. I write here, first of all, PV is equal to constant, or P1 V1 is equal to P2 V2. So going towards the next part. Part 2. Figure 6.2 shows how the air pressure in the atmosphere changes with the height above the ground level. So on the x-axis we have taken height and it is measured in meter, while the pressure is taken along the y-axis and it is measured in kilopascal. Part 1. Using figure 6.2, determine the pressure at the ground level. Give the unit. So we have used this figure and find out the pressure at the ground level. At the ground level, the height is equal to 0 meter. So first of all, I take a point at the 0 meter, which is at this point, and find out the pressure values here. Pressure is maximum at the ground level and it is equal to 100. So 100 kilopascal is the value of pressure at the ground level. I write here 100 and unit is kilopascal. Part 2. Using figure 6.2, determine the height at which the volume of helium in the balloon is twice the volume at the ground level. So here the volume is double. According to Boyle's law, the pressure will be half. I write here P is inversely proportional to V. When volume increase, pressure decrease. Or when I say that P is equal to K over V, I write it with prime. Here volume is double, V prime is equal to 2V, and pressure we have to find out. So P prime will be equal to K over 2V. It will be 1 over 2 and K over V is basically equal to P. So the new pressure will be half as compared to the original pressure. I write here P prime is equal to 1 over 2P. It means that when we double the volume, then its pressure become half. And we have to find out this value of pressure when the volume of the helium is twice the volume at the ground level. It means that we have find out the pressure at the ground level and it is 100. So I write here 100 divided by 2, which is equal to 50 kilopascal. So this is the value of pressure and we have to find out its corresponding height. So going back to figure 50 at this point, here is 50 kilopascal. I meet this point with the graph. And also with the x-axis. So from this point I can measure the height. As it is 2000, it is 4000. So this point will be equal to 3800 meters. So the height will be equal to 3800 meter. I write here 3800 meters. Question number 7. A loudspeaker is built into the side of the swimming pool. The loudspeaker produces sound waves in the water of wavelength 0.25 meters. Part A. First, the frequency of the sound wave is 6.0 kilohertz. Calculate the speed of sound wave in water. So here medium is water and we have to calculate the speed of sound waves in water where the frequency and the wavelength is given. So using the relation that V is equal to F lambda, where V is the speed, F is frequency and lambda is wavelength. And we have to find out the value of V. It will be equal to, frequency is given 6.0 kilohertz. So it will be 6.0 into 10 की power 3. Multiply by wavelength is 0.25 meters. So the speed comes to be 1500 meter per second. So the speed of sound wave in water is 1500 meter per second. Part 2. State a typical value for the speed of sound in air. Here we have to write the value of speed of sound in air, and the speed of sound ranges from 300 to 360 meter per second in air. I write here 300 meter per second to 360 meter per second. Next, part 2. State and explain for the sound produced by the loudspeaker how the wavelength of the sound in the air compares with the wavelength of the sound in water. So how we can compare the wavelength of the sound in air and the wavelength of sound in water. So comparing both of these values, that in the water the speed of sound is 1500 meter per second, while in the air the speed of sound is from 300 to 360. It means that speed of sound in air is less as compared to speed of sound in water, because 330 or 340 is less than 1500. So when the speed is small, the wavelength should be small because the frequency is constant. So I write here V is equal to F lambda. So V is directly proportional to lambda. When the speed is small, the wavelength is also small. So I write here wavelength of air is smaller as compared to wavelength of water. So the wavelength of the sound in air is less and travels less far in same time. It is because that the speed of sound in the air is smaller. Part B. Sound is a longitudinal wave. Explain what is meant by the longitudinal wave. So here we have to define the longitudinal wave. In this wave, the oscillation of the particles is parallel to the direction of the wave travel. So if I consider that wave is traveling from left to right in this way, and I produce the oscillation of the particles in the same direction. So we can see that the particles move in this direction and the wave travel in this direction. Both of these are parallel to each other because there is an angle of 0 degree between them. So we can simply say that the waves in which the oscillation of particles are parallel to the direction of wave travel is called longitudinal wave. I write here in longitudinal wave, the oscillation of particles are parallel to the direction of wave travel. Next part C. The sound emerges from the loudspeaker through a gap. The sound diffracts as it passes through the gap. Part 1. State how the width of the gap affected the diffraction. So first of all, here I draw gap and sound wave approaches in this direction. They are moving in this direction. So the condition is that if the gap width is smaller, if I suppose that this gap width is d, if d is smaller as compared to the wavelength, so there will be large bending, which means that there is large diffraction like this. Second thing is that when the gap between these slits is larger as compared to the wavelength, I draw here. Now in this case, wavelength is smaller and the gap is very large. So when this condition satisfied that gap is larger as compared to wavelength, there will be very small bending, means that there is very less diffraction. It will be like this. So in the part first, state how the width of the gap affects the diffraction. It means that when the width of the gap is smaller, there will be large diffraction. And when the gap width is larger, there will be less diffraction. I write here, the wider the gap, less will be diffraction. Part 2. State how the wavelength of the sound affects the diffraction. So here, how the wavelength affects the diffraction. So from here we can see that when wavelength is larger, the bending is large. When the wavelength is smaller, there is very small bending. The bending is just at the corners. So I write here, the greater the wavelength of the wavefront, the greater will be diffraction. The greater wavelength of wavefronts, greater will be diffraction. Question number 8. Red light traveling in air strikes the curved surface of a semicircular glass block at point P. Figure 8.1 shows the ray of light. Here is a figure 8.1 and we can see that there is a semicircular glass block and a ray of red light incident on the semicircular glass block and hits the edge of this block at an angle 30 degree. The light travels in a straight line from O to Q. Part A. Explain why the light does not change the direction as it enters the glass block at P. So here we can see that this is the ray of red light that is incident on the glass block, and why it does not change its direction when it enters into the glass block. We have to explain this. So first of all, we can see here that the surface of glass block is circular, and if I draw a tangent here, it will be like that. So we can see that when I draw the tangent at the semicircular glass block, it will be a line such that the ray of red light and the surface, both of these are perpendicular to each other. There is an angle of 90 degree between them. When there is an angle of 90 degree, the ray does not change its path. It goes straight into the glass block. So I write here OP is at 90 degree to the curved surface of block. Both the ray and the curved surface of the glass block are right angle to each other. Normal to each other. Part B. The light travels in the glass to Q, where it strikes the edge of the block at 30 degree to the normal. The light then emerges into the air. The refractive index of the glass is 1.5. Calculate the angle between the normal and the ray in the air after the light emerges from the block at Q. So here we have to find out the angle that is between the normal ray and the ray that comes out of the glass block at point Q. So here we can see that actually we have to find out the angle that is between this normal and this ray, that is red light, when it comes out of the glass. So we have to find out this angle. First of all, we can see that there are two medium, glass and air. Glass is a denser medium while air is a rare medium. So I write here N1 sin theta 1, it is equal to N2 and sin theta 2. So this one is for glass block and this one is for air. So N1 is basically the refractive index of the glass. So I write here it as N1, while sin theta 1, it is the sine function of angle that is made in the glass block. Here it is the incident ray. So this angle is basically the angle of incidence. I write here sin of I. It will be equal to N2, the refractive index of the air. And we know that the refractive index for air is equal to 1. So I write here 1 multiplied by sin theta 2. This theta 2 is basically the angle when this ray emerges from the glass block. So I write here as refracted angle. So we have to find out theta sin r. I write here sin r is equal to n1 sine of angle of incidence, and angle of refraction will be equal to sine inverse of n1 multiplied by sine of I. So I use this formula to calculate the angle of refraction. I write here r is equal to sine inverse n1 sine of I. So it will be sine inverse n1, the refractive index of glass, which is given 1.5, multiplied by sine of angle of incidence, that is 30 degree. So that the angle of refraction comes to be 49 degrees. I write here angle is equal to 49 degree. Part 2. On figure 8.1, draw the path of the light in the air after it emerges at Q. So here we have to complete the path of the ray when it emerges from the glass block. So first of all, here we can see that glass is a denser medium while air is a rare. Rare means that the density of air is smaller as compared to the density of glass block. So when the ray of light enters into the rare medium from the denser medium, then it will bend away from the normal. I write here ray of light enters from denser to rare medium. It bends away from normal line. In the figure, the dotted line is the normal line, and we have to draw the ray outside the glass block in such a way that the angle of refraction is greater than angle of incidence. I draw this ray. I draw a ray here. So this is the refracted ray, and we can see that the angle of incident is the angle made between the normal ray and the incident ray. Similarly, the angle of refraction is the angle that made between the normal ray and the refracted ray. So this angle is basically the refracted angle, and we already calculate it is 49 degrees. So going towards the next part. Part C. The direction of the light striking the curved surface of the glass block is changed. So here the direction is changed. The angle between the ray and the normal at Q gradually increases from 30 degree to 90 degree. So the angle increased from 30 degree to 90 degree, that is the angle of incidence. Describe what happens to the light that strikes the block at Q as this angle increases. So first of all, when the angle of incident increases, the angle of refraction also increases, and we can see that this angle of incidence is actually inside the glass block. So if I draw a block here, if I consider that there is a block, and I also draw the normal ray here, ray of light coming, this is the incident ray, and it will refract, goes outside. I again increase the angle of incidence, this is the angle of incidence, then this ray also be refracted. The angle of incidence for which the angle of refraction is equal to 90. This is basically known as critical angle, C. So here, when we increase the angle of incidence, angle of refraction also increases. And when angle of refraction become equal to 90 degree, then this angle of incidence basically known as the critical angle. And there will be the total internal reflection. There will be no refraction at all. So, in this way, when the light strike on the block, it will be totally reflected. There will be no refraction. So I write here angle of refraction from normal increases. Total internal reflection occurs there. The ray of light reflects back into glass. The reflected ray become brighter. Because there is no refraction. Question number 9. A 12-volt battery is connected in series to a 24-watt lamp and to a parallel pair of identical resistors X and Y. Figure 9.1 is the circuit diagram. Here is the figure 9.1 and we can see that there is a battery whose voltage is 12 volt and it is connected with a lamp whose power is given, which is 24 watt, and there are two resistors X and Y. Both of these are identical and both of these are connected in parallel, but the combination of this resistor is connected in series with the lamp and battery. The 24 watt lamp lights at normal brightness when the potential difference across it is 6.0 volt. The lamp is at normal brightness. Part A. Calculate the resistance of the lamp. Here, when the lamp is at normal brightness, we have to calculate the resistance of lamp. By using Ohm's law, that is V is equal to IR. V is potential difference, I is current and R is resistance. Here we have to find out the value of resistance. It will be equal to V over I. It is given that the potential difference of the lamp is 6.0 volt and the value of current is not given. So first of all we have to find out the value of current. The power of lamp is given, that is 24 watt. So I write power is equal to product of current and potential difference. From here first of all I find out the value of current and then put this value of current into second equation to find out the value of resistance. So I will be equal to P over V. Power is 24 watt and potential difference is 6.0. So the value of current comes to be 4.0 ampere. Now I put this value of current here. R is equal to 6.0 divided by 4.0 and the resistance comes to be 1.5 ohm. So it will be equal to 1.5 ohms. Next part B. Determine the potential difference between A and B. Here we have to find out the potential difference here between terminals A and B. So first of all, we consider this circuit as here is a battery and it is connected with the lamp. This is A point. Here I connect the resistance and this is second point. That is B. Here I suppose that there is a resistance, the parallel combination of this resistance. So here the battery, lamp and A and B terminal, all of these are in series combination. It is given that the voltage of battery is 12 volt and the potential difference of lamp is 6.0. So in the series combination, the total potential difference is equal to the sum of the potential difference across all components. I write here potential difference of battery will be equal to the potential difference of terminal AB plus the potential difference of lamp. Here we have to find out the potential difference of AB terminal. So I write here it will be equal to battery potential difference minus the potential difference of lamp. So the battery has a potential difference of 12 volt minus the potential difference of lamp is 6.0, so that the value of potential difference between A and B comes to be 6.0 volt. I write here 6.0 volt. Part 2. The combined resistance of the parallel pair of the identical resistor X and Y. No, the resistors X and Y are identical, means that their resistance is same. So first of all, we have to calculate the resistance of the lamp in part first. Now here we have to describe the combined resistance of the parallel pair of identical resistor. So we can see here as the potential difference across the terminal AB is 6.0 and the potential difference across the lamp is also 6.0. I write here it is also 6.0 volt. So as the potential difference is same, I write here V of AB is equal to V of lamp, that is 6.0 volt. And both of these are connected in series like this. So in the series combination, the value of current remains same. So the value of current across the lamp is equal to the value of current across the AB. So I write here current across AB is same that the current across lamp. So when the potential difference and the current is same, we can simply say that the resistance of the AB, that is the parallel combination of X and Y resistor, is same as that of the resistance of lamp. And in part A we have calculated the resistance of lamp and it is 1.5. So I write here the resistance will be equal to 1.5 ohm. I also write here as the voltage of lamp and parallel combination of resistance is same and the current remain same in series. For example, the current across AB will be equal to the current across lamp. So we can simply say that the resistance of the parallel combination will be equal to the resistance of lamp, which is equal to 1.5 ohms. Next, part 3. The resistance of X. Now we have to find out the resistance of X. X is here in parallel combination with Y. So we have to find out the resistance X. I write here 1 over R, that is equivalent resistor. It will be equal to 1 over Rx plus 1 over Ry. Both of these resistance are identical. Rx will be equal to Ry and it is equal to R. I write here it is equivalent resistance. So this resistance is basically 1.5 ohms. 1 over 1.5, it will be equal to 1 over R plus 1 over R. So we can write here that 1 over 1.5 is equal to 2 over R. So R will be equal to 2 into 1.5, that is equal to 3.0 ohms. So the resistance of X is equal to 3.0 ohm and the resistance of Y is also equal to 3.0 ohms. So it will be 3.0 ohms. Going towards the next part, C. The resistor X is removed from the circuit in figure 9.1. Explain why the lamp becomes dimmer. So going back, here we have removed this resistor X. So what will happen? First of all, you can see that here X and Y are in parallel combination and the equivalent resistance of the parallel combination is very small as compared to the any one of these resistance. So when we remove X, then the total resistance increase. So when the total resistance increase, current decrease. So when the current decrease, the current that passes through the lamp also decrease and it becomes dimmer. So I write here the resistance of circuit increase and current decrease. Less current pass through lamp. As a result, it becomes dimmer. So this is the main reason that when we remove the resistor X, the lamp becomes dimmer. Question number 10. Figure 10.1 shows a transformer that consists of two coils P and Q and an iron core. Here is a figure 10.1 and we can see that there are two coils. First one is primary coil, which here written as coil P, while second one is secondary coil, which is represented by coil Q. The number of turns on the primary coil is 200, while the number of turns on the secondary coil is 340. There are 200 turns on the coil P and 340 turns on the coil Q. A 4.0 volt AC power supply is connected to coil P. Part A. First, explain why there is a voltage between the two terminals of the Q. So here we have supply the AC power here but there is no alternating current on the secondary coil. It means that it did not connect any power supply here. So why there is a voltage across the terminals of the secondary coil? We have to explain this. So first of all, when the power supply is on a primary coil, then there will be the current that is flowing through the primary coil here. Due to this current, there will be the changing magnetic field. So the magnetic field lines are from north to south pole, just like this. These are the magnetic field lines. Some of these magnetic field lines also passes through the core and the coil Q in this way, because both of these coils are linked magnetically, otherwise there is no connection between them. So some of the magnetic lines of the primary coil is passing through the secondary coil, due to which there is the induced voltage across the terminals of the coil Q. So due to this magnetic field that is produced in the primary coil, there is a voltage, that is induced voltage, in the secondary coil. So I write here AC current through primary coil P produces a changing magnetic field which passes through the iron core. And cuts the secondary coil Q. In such a way, there induces the alternating voltage so that induces an AC voltage across terminals of coil Q. Part 2. Explain why the coil of the transformer is made of soft iron. So here we have to explain that why the coil is made from the soft iron, because soft iron is a temporary magnetic material. So that's why we use a soft iron in the transformer. I write here soft iron is a temporary magnetic material. Next part B. Part first. Calculate the voltage between the two terminals of the coil Q. So here we have to find the voltage across the terminals Q, that is secondary coil. So this voltage is represented by Vs. Here we have to find out the value of Vs. So we know that the ratio of the number of turns is equal to the ratio of the voltage. I write here Ns over Np is equal to Vs over Vp. It means that the ratio of the number of turns of secondary to primary coil is equal to the voltage across the secondary to primary coil. So here we have to find out Vs. Vs will be equal to Ns multiplied by Vp divided by Np. So here we have put the values which is given. There are 200 turns on the coil P. It means that the primary coil has 200 turns. So I write here 200, that is for the primary coil. For the secondary coil there are 340 turns. So it will be 340 multiplied by the voltage across primary, that is 4.0 volt. It is 4.0. So the value of the voltage across the secondary comes to be 6.8 volt. I write here voltage is equal to 6.8 volt. Going towards the next part. 2. A heater is connected to a coil Q. The current in the heater is 3.5 ampere. The transformer is 100% efficient. Calculate the current in the coil P. So here we are given that the transformer has 100% efficiency. When the transformer has 100% efficiency, it means that the input power will be equal to output power. Input power is supplied actually to the primary coil, while the output power is taken from the secondary coil. So we also know that power is the product of current and potential difference. I write here Ip Vp, that is for the primary coil, it will be equal to Is Vs, which is for the secondary coil. So here we have to find out the current in the coil P. Coil P is primary coil. It means that we have to find out the current in the primary coil. So it will be equal to Is Vs over Vp. So the current in the secondary coil is 3.5 because heater is connected to the secondary coil and the current in heater is given. So this current is basically through the secondary coil. It will be 3.5 multiplied by the voltage across secondary. Here coil Q is secondary coil and we calculate its voltage, that is 6.8. So I write here 6.8 divided by the voltage of primary coil that is given in the question. It is 4.0 volt. So I write here 0.4. So the value of the primary current comes to be 6.13 ampere. I write here part C. A transformer is used to step up the voltage before electrical energy is transmitted over long distances. State and explain one economic effect of transmitting electrical energy at high voltage. So the effect is that there will be less energy loss in the cables. So when there is less energy loss in the cable, there will be less fuel is burnt for the generation of power. So I write here there will be less energy loss in cables so less fuel is burnt for the generation of power. Question number 11, part A. Figure 11.1 shows equipment that is used to investigate the effect of magnetic field on the path of the beam of gamma rays. A radioactive source emits gamma rays. The gamma rays pass through the two small holes in the thick lead plate. Then the gamma rays pass through the shaded region and into the detector. Part first. Suggest the purpose of the two lead plate. So first of all, in figure 11.1 we can see that there is a source of gamma rays and the gamma rays enters into the thick lead plate, and after passing through these plates, these enter into the shaded area and then these are detected by the. We have to describe the purpose of these thick lead plate. So this thick lead plate actually produces the narrow beam of gamma rays, because the source of gamma rays produces gamma rays and these gamma rays passing through thick lead plate and they convert into the narrow beam of gamma rays. So the lead plates actually used to produce the narrow beam of gamma rays, and it also absorbs all the unwanted gamma rays. So I write here, they produce narrow beam of gamma rays and absorbs all unwanted gamma rays. Part 2. A magnetic field directed into the page is set up in the shaded region. State and explain what happens to the reading of the detector. So the magnetic field is applied into the shaded region and we have to describe that what happens to the gamma rays. So first of all, we know that gamma rays are electromagnetic rays and they don't have any charge. These are neutral. And we know that when any particle enters into the magnetic field, it is detected only when it has charge. But the gamma rays are neutral. They don't have any charge, so there will be no deflection when they enters into the magnetic field. They move in the straight path. So I write here, there will be no change to the reading of detector. Because gamma rays are uncharged, and cannot be deflected, by magnetic field. Next, part B. State the relative ionizing effect of alpha particles, beta particles and gamma rays. Suggest an explanation for the differences. So first of all, we have to describe the ionizing power of alpha particle, beta particles and gamma particles. And then we have to explain the reason in the difference. So first of all, I write here alpha particle, beta and gamma rays. So the alpha particles is more ionizing I write here ionization. Alpha particle has more ionization as compared to beta particle, and beta particle has more ionization as compared to gamma rays. The reason is that the mass of alpha particle is very large as compared to beta particle, and beta particle has mass large as compared to gamma particle, and also charge. Alpha particles have more ionization than beta particle, and beta particles have more ionization than gamma rays. The reason is that mass of alpha particle is greater than mass of beta particle, which is even greater than mass of gamma rays. And also the charge of alpha particle is greater than charge of beta particle, which is even greater than charge of gamma rays. So this is the basic reason that why the alpha particles have more ionization as compared to beta and gamma rays.